Hello and welcome to episode 35 of Subplot Course, a podcast discussing a new science fiction work on the second Tuesday of every month. I'm Stavros, and while this book is largely about red and blue, with me is someone who fits with green, considering its penchant for stability and safety, Charlie. Say hi, Charlie.
That was not about math or my occasional depression. Okay, hi.
Okay.
Kind of about the latter, but that's okay.
Charlie teaches math. Also with me is Vincent, who fits well with the perfection symbolized by white, because how else does someone get to be high school valedictorian? Say hi, Vincent.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm perfect anymore, but you can keep thinking that. Or your parents can keep thinking that.
That's true. Vincent's an epidemiologist. Also with us is someone who fits the epitome of success, enthusiasm, and determination of the color orange. John. Say hi, John.
Hey, how's it going?
John is a mechanical engineer. And finally, we also have with us a prime example of the mysterious and elegance that can only come from black. Adrian. Say hi, Adrian.
As the prophet says, it's better to be a pirate than join the Navy.
Okay, and Adrian teaches English literature. And today we're going to be talking about This Is How to Lose the Time War, co-written by El-Mohtar and Max Gladstone, and published in 2019. And of course, you should be prepared for spoilers. So the plot of this novel follows two time travel warriors, Red from a faction called the Agency, and Blue from a faction called Garden. The two begin to follow each other through time and start to correspond with what starts out as gloating, but as they continue to write back and forth, they begin to develop a romantic relationship that they hide from their superiors in each faction. But eventually they are suspected by their superiors. Red's side develops a plan for Red to kill off Blue, but Red makes it super obvious for Blue to avoid that if she wishes, but Blue ends up taking the poison and dying. This drives Red kind of into a sadness spiral, but she eventually comes up with a time travel plan involving going back to Blue's gestation and implanting enough redness into her to essentially allow her to be resurrected after her untimely death. So this strategy ends up succeeding. Blue comes back to life, and the novel closes as the two plan to escape the time war together somehow. Doesn't go into details how, but I hope they made
a lot of somehows in this book.
Yes, that's true. But before we jump into any topics, I do want to go over. I mean, this is a relatively recent novel in 2019. It has won a couple of awards and is finalist for a couple of awards. So just to throw that out there, the BSFA Award for Best Shorter Fiction, something it got, and it is a finalist for the 2019 Nebula Award for Best Novella and 2020 Hugo Award for Best Novella. So it is a contender for all of these big name awards here.
Has the 2019 award not been decided yet? Still under decision?
As far as I know, no, but maybe it has, and maybe because of the apocalypse it has not been decided, but I'm not sure. Maybe someone can correct us in the comments, or one of you guys will correct me by the time this episode's over. Who knows? But let's jump right into some discussion topics. The first one I wanted to cover, I wanted to talk about the prose or tone of the book. This book is not afraid to be very prosy, very kind of poetic in nature. Maybe Adrian, you can what's the descriptor I'm looking for here? Kind of complex language.
I think poetic is probably the right word.
Poetic. Okay. So yeah, I mean the whole tone of the book is like that, and something I specifically called out here as interesting is both Red and Blue. I feel like despite the fact that they're these I feel like when I think of like a time travel, someone who goes back in time to I kind of think of like Arnold Schwarzenegger as like the kind of like super soldier type person, but in reality they both kind of come off as prosy, and even this book prints these letters written verbatim supposedly by both Red and Blue, and they all come off as poetic or prosy. I wanted to get your guys' thoughts on that.
I actually had a hard time distinguishing the two. When I read them, they were so similar in terms of their flowery language and their allusions and the types of things that they were interested in, that I was kind of almost dubious as to how is it possible that two beings, potentially from different races, potentially from completely different species, are writing in English in such a similar tone to the point where I could almost interchange one with the other? Like blue could say what red said and red could say what blue said, and I wouldn't really be able to tell the difference for the most part. And not only that, they almost struck me as almost like Victorian, like in terms of like their writing style. It was like not like modern English. There was no emojis. There were no like hey, like LOL, where are you at? Like it was like full on, like they came from a completely different like era of English literature essentially, and they wrote like they were like romantic Victorian, and it was just very interesting to me that, and kind of dubious that they were so similar.
Interesting. Adrian, I mean, you're the expert on this kind of stuff. I mean, what were your reactions on this?
I mean, first of all, they do directly reference like a Victorian like manual for writing letters in the book early on. Like that's how Red sort of like composes her letters, right? So that's there's that. And the novel is ultimately an epistolary novel, right? So it's one of these like one of these very early novel forms. This very like this notion of like sending letters back and forth as allowing for a novel to kind of emerge and to world was an early tactic in before we had more developed understandings like how you can actually make fiction lively, let's say. And of course that also would have been popular in the Victorian era as well.
Yeah, you think there were books like this in the Victorian era where there were just letters going back and forth? That's how the writing style was?
I mean, the earliest novels, like Pamela, Virtue Rewarded, for example, 1740, right? That the very first novels were very much like this.
That and the first few chess games, right? No, I'm just kidding.
Sure.
Well, we could say the Bible. It's filled with letters from Paul to
that's true.
Apostle and so forth. Although I hardly think that's written by one author. So.
Hey, this book was written by one author.
We can talk about that.
Yeah, and that's interesting. Yeah, I was going to mention, and Vincent, I actually had the same problem as you, where the tone of Red and Blue's letters and the language are so similar. I had a hard time keeping them apart until finally one of them dies at the end, and I'm like, okay, now there's a distinction between the two characters.
One's dead.
That's what it took. But the interesting part is that the Blue's letters were apparently all written by El-Mohtar, and Red's are all written by Gladstone, which is the other co-author for this book. So it's crazy to me that like the characters sound so similar. I mean, these two authors must be like really in each other's zones. Like they really know how to. They really got it together as far as matching up the style. But I'm wondering if it's like to the detriment of the book that they sound so similar.
Yeah, the one thing I did like in terms of like the world building and all that stuff is Red's from kind of like the techno future, and like all of her events are like war themed or battles and that sort of thing. Whereas Blue's from like the nature future, and even though she does do like some assassinations and stuff, or it's implied, like a lot of hers seem to be like a lot sneakier and like long-term type deals. Like it's not 100% true either way, but it's like thematically that kind of separated the chapters, if not the letter writing.
I mean, my joke about the Prophet, right, is that Red's references are all like these like Silicon Valley people that she calls like the prophets, right? Versus, I mean, I don't even know if Blue has a kind of register of reference, given that she's from that much more like organic society.
Yeah,
she's a hippie.
Yeah,
she's a war.
Yeah.
The funny thing was that I distinctly remember Red saying that Blue was stronger than me, and like Blue like saved Red's life in some encounter, like one of the first times when they first saw each other. And I was like, oh, the garden organic hippie is like stronger in combat than the Red one. And I was like, okay, that's a distinguishing factor. And then I kept reading. I was like, okay, now I'm confused. They both sound the same.
It didn't help that in the audiobook, like there wasn't a big distinguishing, not only just in the writing, but also like how the audio was read, the narrator read it the same, so it was not that easy. I found myself, I'm glad you guys mentioned it, because I felt a little embarrassed. I was like, I had to go back and listen to it a couple of times. Like, wait, which one is this one? Is this Blue or Red?
Back 15 seconds. Back 15 seconds.
Back 15 seconds. I almost thought we were going to find out at the end that these two people were the same person.
Oh,
that's kind of where you end up, though, right? A little, like in some way.
Oh yeah.
Well, no, but I mean, like actually, they were actually the same person in two different threads of reality. I guess is my. That was my. I thought they were going to make that happen in the end. It didn't.
That's like mental masturbation.
Mentioning like mentioning their real name and then the reveal at the end would be they in fact have the same real name, would be the same person or something like that? Is that what you're expecting?
Both their moms' names are Marta or something? Or Martha?
Yeah,
Oh,
because,
God,
because they're so
Southern
similar.
romance.
They're
So,
so similar.
You guys talking about the letters? I think the one thing I was thinking is I remember early on when they're kind of harassing each other, they had more distinct voices. But
Mhm.
once it gets into like the more desperate, almost romantic part of it, I feel like it's almost just kind of a natural outcome of that expression of like desperate need and want kind of demands a similar-ish type tone, but it's at the detriment of like keeping the characters' personalities separate, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And honestly, the tone of the letters just transcend, or I should say, the tone in the letters is, to me, just permeates all of the language of the novel, and it just gives it the whole thing, this prosy, poetic feel, and it just, yeah, I mean, until we got to the end where you actually see how things operate in the garden, it kind of blends them all together, not really in a good way, in my opinion. But yeah, I mean, let's since we're talking about a little bit about the two time factions, Garden and Agency. I mean, we've talked a little bit about them already. Garden is this, I think it kind of makes it seem like this like space garden where plants grow somewhere because Red visits it at the end. And then the Agency, all we know about that is we have the Commandant, who is the like Red's immediate superior. And seems more techie and stuff like that. So, we kind of talked a little bit before the show, like, are Red and Blue the same race? My personal take on that is I'm not sure if there's enough information to glean that. My knee jerk would be that they are both human, but are so far in the future offset that they're just not identifiable by us, by 2020 humans, as human anymore. But what do you guys think there?
I thought I vaguely remember reading stuff about like garden and seed pods and some stuff, but I may have gotten confused by the fact that they were conversing in like the language of plants at some point. So to me, I thought that they were separate races. But the garden thing and the name of their groups threw me for a second. So I don't know if there was enough information. I didn't see anything like distinctive or and the fact that they both spoke English to such a certain degree, like it made me feel like they had to be human. There's no way that you're gonna be talking to some alien species and you're all talking in Victorian, both of you, unless there's some unifying like catastrophic mother race that was Victorian and made both of you.
I'm confused by the question. Are you suggesting that they're not both derived from life on Earth? Is that?
I mean, I guess that's part of the question. I mean, are they human and are they from Earth? And one other thing, I should call out is I think pretty much all of the pronouns used are she for, but I also get the impression that the races from both Garden and Agency are just so far in the future that like gender for us would be hard to recognize.
Yeah, I mean, you can't emphasize like how insane the time scale is in this.
Right.
Right? Like there are scenes which take place like before the Ice Age, right, all the way to like futures like well beyond like starship technology, right? So that's very how to make a judgment about that is really difficult.
Yeah.
So at one point they do mention in like one of the past that in this version Red is a man. So like because otherwise I was thinking this kind of the same idea as ancillary justice, where yes, they still have sexes, but they've kind of eliminated the idea as a cultural concept.
Yeah. Well, I also got the impression that whenever they go back in time, they kind of assume roles. So, like at one point, one of the characters is married, but I get the impression it's very superficial. Kind of funny. They're like, then I spent 20 years in this reality. I'm like, that's a long time. But they're just like, whatever. Then I killed 100 people and then I left.
Like quantum leap style?
Yeah. Yes, that's a great analogy. Yes, totally. It is totally quantum leap, except it's like you spend 20 years doing stuff.
I feel like actually both of them are kind of like along the lines of Ghost in the Shell, where like they are like almost like psychic entities dropped into like physical bodies. Because at certain points, I remember that red or blue are like in the bodies of wolves, or they have 6 legs and like six
Yeah.
legs, or like they're in bodies of. It feels like they get put into sleeves essentially.
Yes.
Well, only some people get that, like the commandant, right, who can slide into like this like Nazi zombie nurse's like body,
Yeah.
right?
It felt
Because
like
of
Red
the,
and Blue
like
both did as
hyperspace
well.
engines into the future, which allow like her to not have a body. But what makes the agent special, right, is that they are built for adaptability in the timeline, that they can go anywhere and be anything.
Right.
But definitely either blue or red at one point was in the body of a wolf and was like.
Yeah.
And so they definitely are sleeving. At least one of them is sleeving. So to a certain extent, like maybe you never know what like species or even gender they are. They're more just like psychic entities. They're just like individual consciousnesses, which just get dropped into physical bodies. And maybe that's the reason why they can fall in love and transcend, like, you know.
Well, they
could
are
be
heavily
better,
modified, right? And like
Yeah.
just like the very notion of the war seems to suggest they are probably the same species fighting for their own individual destinies, right? That they can't, their timelines seem unable to coexist, and they both have developed time travel technology, and so they're kind of warring to make sure that their timeline survives, which suggests that the other group is some other version of them.
Yeah, so I assume that's what all the talk about braids and strands is kind of like peeling timelines into their own version, or just like utterly annihilating timelines they've lost control of, or that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense to me, right? Like when Blue dies, right, and like Guardians like destroys that timeline when Red invades, right?
I think that it's probably pretty demonstrable that either these are derived from human beings, or they're past, or in some way, the Earth, specifically human history on Earth, is incredibly important to their development, because many of the scenes that we encounter where they've traveled back in time are of them at like demonstrably historical human scenes, like the slaying of an English king, or the Nazis fighting suddenly with zombie technology, or exactly, like it seems too coincidental that if this was an alien race, that they're not like heavily entwined with Earth.
Yeah.
Because there's so many times where the Earth, some event they need to change on Earth's timeline is necessary for them to keep the upper hand.
Yeah.
I wonder if this is like it's a universe like Dune, where like humanity kind of takes over the universe or that sort of thing. It's like not like aliens are really mentioned or that sort of type of sci-fi.
Yep.
So the one point I have to make that's random is this whole concept, because it was bugging me the whole book, and then I realized why. Like the whole concept of like alternate futures of like science and nature fighting for like control of the present and different dimensions and stuff like that. That is literally the plot of Chrono Cross.
What is this? What is this?
Corona.
Wow.
Wow.
It's
this is a common time travel topic, though, isn't it? I mean, or plot, I should say.
probably.
Well, it's a combination at least, right?
Yeah. But my real point is, I do like how the book is more about like the emotions, and like the setting is dressing, and like the setting is more so brought up kind of for literary purposes to flesh out the like drama and kind of desperation of their situation. And I think they do. The authors do a really good job of doing that, like giving us enough hints that you can kind of understand what's going on without distracting from the emotional core of the book.
Yeah, we get like enough of the factors which could influence their personalities and their missions and their end goals, right? But you're right, like, it's not as explicit as, I don't know, Fire Upon the Deep, right?
Sure. And that kind of leads into my follow-up question on this: is do you guys feel that either one of these factions is better? Or, I mean, in my opinion, I don't know if we really learned enough about them. I mean, all we know is that they are structured a little bit different and want to wipe the other one out, but do you guys feel like one or the other is more in the right in this war, or is there just not enough information to go on?
There's torture on both sides, for sure.
I mean, both are obviously like totalitarian collectivist futures, which is bad. Boo!
But one has the Chaos Oracle and the other one has the Garden, whatever that is. So
Right.
take that as you will.
I think it's hard to call morality on this one. They both seem hell-bent on destroying the other reality, which in and of itself seems unethical. And anybody else, not to like just completely pivot away from your question because I don't like it, but also because I would like to rather talk about, like, did anybody find it strange that the future is incredibly stable? Like, these two warring organizations that have the ability to change time are able to go back and like change events, like willy-nilly, kill this guy, add this technology, blah, blah, blah. And yet they both retain the ability to have like time travel. Like, they're not screwing with each other so much that it makes instability that their organizations don't exist anymore, or that the war is over, or that there's new, like, time is that stable that they're able to do all these interventions.
You're totally right, John. Like, I envision like the time as like a sweater, and they're like picking at the threads and the braids and stuff like that. Like, how the hell do two factions who are unknitting a sweater suddenly still retain a sweater in the end? It's just like a big fur ball. Like, you know, like everything just devolves at some point.
I got the impression. My personal take is that it sounded like there's like not only like threads and braids in the same timeline, but they're also jumping timelines too. Did you guys get that at all? Or there's like parallel realities there. So
yeah, I mean, that's the whole point, is they're jumping parallel realities to try to force the individual realities to become their own future.
Yeah.
I mean, like, I think the analogy that you use, like the sweater, right? It's like two people are knitting a sweater, right? So in the future, they now have gained the ability to like knit time, right? And so they are trying to kind of make the sweater the one that they want it to be and try to get rid of the other sweater. But they also apparently have accords, right? They like, this is kind of like a Cold War, it seems, where they are trying to make sure that there still is a sweater by the end of it, right? They talk about how you can't go and like invade something that's too close to their timelines, in part because it's dangerous, but also because you threaten too much chaos, is what they say, right? That's too much entropy. And that would destroy
they're
everything.
fighting over the fringe and like the little like frills and decorations on the edges, but the sweater is still intact at all times.
Yeah, I mean, my guess is that it's kind of like either there's going to be a technological singularity or some kind of like organic manipulation singularity, and so they're both trying to push it towards that eventually leads to themselves. But yeah, the whole idea of they both have kind of abilities to watch out for chaos, to screw it up too much, seems to be another aspect of not just destroying time in the future and all that stuff.
Yeah,
it's not like people just like running around like, you know, killing Hitler randomly, right? That these are all supposed to be like really precise actions. You know, like what was the first one where it's like starting a war so that like one person, you know, like may or may not survive and have this impact and this impact. Right? Causality is constantly being discussed in this novel.
Adrian, if neither faction went back and killed Hitler, then both factions are terrible.
Hey, everyone here has played Command & Conquer Red Alert. We know exactly how that ends.
At least Red's people just keep going back and like perpetually killing Caesar over and over again, which I laughed at. It's like their common meeting place, right? It's like, hey, it's fun, just go and do it.
Interesting. Okay.
I think the agency kind of is painted in a more sinister light than Garden is. Like, if you just look at the events that they suggest, you know, like there's nothing overtly, you know, as sinister as, you know, Nazis making zombies in the Garden side, right?
But the Garden made the zombies. That was part of the thing. Is remember they said, the guard. So it's like, that's the one thing in terms of the perspectives of the characters. You get a lot more detail about Red's future until the end when she visits Blue's future. So I think that's just a perspective thing where, yeah, the techno future looks terrible because you see more of how it's not working for individuals and that sort of thing. But I think the implication is both of them are too controlling and too self-interested to really work for the characters and their plight in the story.
How good can the world be when one world ends up like worshipping an iPhone?
We are in the worst braid. That's for sure. Okay.
It does bring up that they do mention random pieces of like common like modern like technology. Like Siri pops up for sure at one point.
Yeah.
And then like they reference Blue in one of the letters as Blue Daba Diba da Diet, like the Blue song from like the pop culture.
Yep.
Like they're very these random like
oh my god,
to pop culture where I'm like very kind of thrown off by like, wait, you're supposed to be Victorian. Why are you referencing all this random like junk?
Yeah, some of the early letters got very like memey, and I was like, oh my god, I'm gonna hate this. But that like quickly went away when like their letters got more personal and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Did anybody think it was weird that they both? So it almost seems unnecessary to have a time war, because they're having a time war that sort of implies that they both exist at the same time. They either don't exist at the same chronological time, or they do exist in the same chronological time, but on extremely stable parallel realities. So is it even really necessary to wage a time war? They both exist.
Welcome for the futility of war metaphor, John.
Would that come later in the podcast? That's later in the podcast. Sorry about that. Sorry.
No. I mean, I think you're totally right. There's definitely like I got the sense of, you know, especially when they're like, oh great, going back to freaking Atlantis. Who gives a shit about Atlantis? Oh god, guess I gotta change the lava flow. Fuck this lava. Like that. I mean,
this one doesn't even have flying cars.
yeah, definitely futility of war in there, John, for sure. So.
Well, I imagine it's also like once you have technology to mess with time, then you are endangering that stability, right? That if no one had time travel, then these different universes would probably just like exist exactly parallel, right? But like once you've developed the technology and can actually mess with time, then you kind of have to fight for your own timeline, I guess.
How does the nature future create time travel? I'm just curious.
Stop asking questions.
Is this like Avatar, where they just literally plug themselves into plants and then I roll my eyes really hard?
Midi-chlorians.
I'm sure there's some plant in the Amazon that also time travels. That we haven't seen.
Sounds reasonable.
It's a scrode.
Yeah. That's right.
Scrode? Okay, I am convinced then. Ultimately satisfied.
Did I get you? I get you with that one?
All right. Well, let's move on to a slightly different topic. I wanted to talk about the what I call kind of a gimmick when Red basically resurrects Blue with her time travel shenanigans. But before we can talk to that, as like, I mean, I consider that kind of like the resolution or the the climax of the book when she does this. But I just can't look at this without considering the whole rest of the novel where they're just writing letters back and forth. So I will say my reaction was when we were coming all the way up to Blue's first death or her death. I was a little bit. I was thinking like, how is this going to end? And I think similar to you guys, I was getting kind of strong like Romeo and Juliet vibes from this, right up to like the poison at the end. And I just honestly wasn't a huge fan. I thought like, okay, like guess what? Next chapter, oh, it's a new letter, and like, oh, it's like kind of a little bit on the predictable side even. But then Blue dies, and Red is left alive, and I was like, wow. And then they brought in the time travel bit where she, Red has to. Then I was like, oh, okay, here we go, action hero time, where she goes and like breaks into garden and while evading the agency's people, and there's like action scenes and stuff, and then she pulls this time travel-y resolution, and while it's maybe I would maybe even see it a little bit predictable, that actually gave me a lot of satisfaction from this book. It kind of redeemed the book for me right at the end. Mm-hmm. So I was like, okay, yes, like. This could be this war where the warriors are corresponding could have taken place. It didn't have to be a time war necessarily. But then, okay, right at the end, we've got the time travel bit where she saves the day by going back and changing something in Blue's past. So I want to ask you guys, did you have the same issue where we're kind of heading towards this, Romeo and Juliet style tragedy with no way out, and then the time travel shenanigans pop in at the end and kind of save the day, or did you guys have a different reaction from that?
I mean, it's all well seated where it's like, oh, I lost connection to Garden for a while, but they thought maybe someone messed with me or something like that. So the moment I got to the point where Blue died, I'm like, I still got like another however many pages left. I'm like, they haven't explained what the shadow is.
Okay.
So I think they, because the book is about the drama and the feelings and all that sort of stuff. Yes. The moment they have like Blue dies, you remember, oh yeah, Blue was in Red's past at this one particular moment that was already mentioned in Red's letters. So of course Red's gonna end up in Blue's past in the one moment that's mentioned in Blue's letters. I think I was still wondering what the shadow was going to be. I figured that was going to be an end part of the book. I wasn't sure if it was going to be one of the characters themselves or like one of the agencies or the garden or something like that. Like I didn't have that all figured out.
Okay.
But around the time Blue died, I was like, okay, how do we get to the point where this all happens? But, because it's more about the poetry and the romance and all that stuff. I feel
This
I went along with it
disdain.
because I'm like the time travel tropes are just there to push along kind of the literary aspects of the novel, in my opinion.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that I was definitely feeling some fatigue as well, Starbucks, by the middle. Like, it felt like the letter portion could go on forever. That's probably the reason why this is a novella as opposed to like a novel, right?
Yeah.
And I think what was supposed to check that is like this like overarching danger between, you know, like agency and Garden, like closing in on them. Except like they are both like the best agents that either side has. It never felt like an actual danger until the agency sort of steps in and commands them to kill Blue, right? So because there isn't that tension there to kind of make the letters feel like urgent and valuable because they're going to be limited, I think that I got very tired by the middle. Definitely like okay, this is going to keep on going forever.
yeah, that's exactly the same as me. I was just like, oh my god, guess what? They found another crazy way to send a letter. Okay, you know, I mean, it was cool at first, but then it's like, a little tired. And kind of going towards an actual
like the 40th time where it's like, the lights upon the lava are the rings of the trees.
This is a tangent question. Do you have a favorite mode of delivering a letter in this book? Because there are so many, right? They're all different.
Mine was definitely the fish in the seal with Red's misreading of you got to put it in an envelope or something like that.
Oh, right.
Interesting. I liked the cutting down the trees where like I forget, I don't even know which one it was, but was she like a Mongolian or something, and one of the people are chopping down trees, like, how about this tree? And she's like, no, take that tree to my tent, and she just hangs out with the tree for a while, and they're just like, okay, I guess. That was probably my favorite.
They burned it.
Yeah.
You got a brownie. Anyone else? I'm just curious.
Everyone's like, no, screw those letters.
I lost track of the letters. There was a lot of them.
I like the early Bone one from like the prehistoric civilization.
Oh yeah, that's good.
Right, where like Blue has like so outplayed Red, where like she's got this guy in like a whole other life and has these bones that is going to make a sound that is going to deliver the message. That's pretty badass.
Oh man.
I'd say that's obviously the hook of this book. Like, the idea behind this book is like, you know, lol, time travel agents sending crazy notes, and like that's I would say that's even over the like, you know, if I were these two authors pitching this book, it would not be like time travel love story. It would be like crazy letters through crazy time travel shenanigans.
It had a spy versus spy sort of.
Yeah, it totally did. Yeah,
totally.
100%.
Yeah.
So,
well, I mean, getting back to your question, Thomas, about like whether or not there was like a redeeming point in the book, like to me, there really wasn't. Like, it was very clear in the beginning that like it was going to be a very dichotomous book to me. Like, it was like, if you loved sci-fi and you like the hard inner workings of sci-fi, this book would not necessarily satisfy that itch, because every time they got in a scenario where they were spy versus spying, it'd be like, it was very predictable that one would foil the other, because that would be how they get the letters. Like, oh, I screwed you, and here's a letter waiting for you. So like, it got to the point where I actually didn't care anymore about the sci-fi settings, because I felt like they were completely superfluous. They could have been like, they just walked into a coffee shop. It's like, oh, it was in the coffee beans. Oh, this time it was in the coffee mug. Oh, this time it's in the froth that I made your macchiato in. It was like, it doesn't matter anymore. And like, I really disliked that aspect, the fact that it didn't matter. Like, and it got back to the whole futility of war. Like, basically anything they were doing was completely futile, because they were just like basically just undoing each other's work. So with regards to sci-fi, is very unsatisfying, but it was all about the prose. So like, I have this very strong feeling that like there are people I know in my life who will either love it or very much hate it. And like, all the people who enjoy English and the nuances of English and how it's written, and like, you know, like I felt like Adrian would be like a shoo-in. Like, Adrian would be the type of guy who liked this book, and then the people who are more into like, hey, like, let's talk about the small details of how like the science works and how these factions evolved and stuff like that. You don't get any of that. So like, personally, I was not a huge fan, and there was not really a redeeming point, even though there was this time travel kind of like, you know, twist at the end. It wasn't that much of a twist, and by then I'd almost kind of lost faith in any kind of the sci-fi elements of it. And I was only
you're just suffering to get through it. Okay.
No, I wasn't suffering. It's more like I just stopped treating it as a sci-fi book. I just completely treated it as a romance book.
That's when the sci-fi comes in, though, even right at the end. I don't know.
It does, but it wasn't enough.
It wasn't enough. Okay, yeah.
It was like trying to resuscitate like a dying patient. It was like, a little too much, a little too little, too late.
Man, the patient was dying for 300 pages. Oh my god!
It definitely raises like it raises the question though, like, how do you create narrative tension in a time travel? right? Where like narrative is always going to be negotiable because you can always travel backwards in time, right? People always do like that stupid thing of Doctor Who, like, oh, you can't be in the same place with whatever your person is at the same time, or something silly like that, right? Or talk about cause, like, you know, chaos or whatever. But in like a novel that's going to stay true to time travel principles, like there's not exactly a good reason why not, right? So
I think the time traveler's wife probably did it the best for me, where like the guy came out how he traveled, and so it was a very, very like difficult to like see this person like get thrown into random places at random times, completely unprepared. Like that time travel book like did it for me. Like it was a very much a romance book, but it's also very much a time travel book. This book struck me as like a lesser version of the time traveler's wife.
I see. Interesting. Okay. Well, so let's move on to our next topic here, which is, of course, our contest topic. So what we're going to do, we each have had a little bit of time to think about this. And the contest is, if we, or any one of us, were to write these kind of same flavor of messages as Red and Blue, these secret time-based messages, who would it be, or what would it be, I should say, who would it be to, and how would you do it? And then, as usual, we're going to go through everyone's answers, and we're going to vote and see whose application of this time travel letter writing shenanigans is the best. So I will go first. Yeah, my idea, this is of course assuming I had the access to the same level of tech as Red and Blue did. So go back and forth through time. I would personally go back in time to roughly the year 2001. There, I'm pretty sure there would be a tailor shop of some kind. I'm pretty sure it'd be in contract with the local high school, kind of, providing materials for them. Maybe they do alterations, that kind of thing. I'd go in, I'd give the owner maybe some money and a note, and a message would get stitched into a very specific scarf. And this scarf would eventually get awarded to a very specific valedictorian. And so Vincent, I'm pretty sure you don't have your valedictorian scarf here, but I mean, if you were to open it up and look inside, the note says,
what did it say, fuck you?
No.
It's poisonous and you kill him instantly.
I wouldn't kill you. Wow, you guys are dark. There's a lot of murder coming up soon.
I just thought it'd be like a very ironic statement. It's like, I went through all this effort just to say, your fly's undone. Oh God, thank you, time traveler, saved me.
Anyway, so that's my answer. Who's written?
Wait, what does it say? What's the message?
What does it say?
It says you're off the podcast.
Oh, you're off. It's something snarky.
So
surprise.
Anyway, I tried. Who's up next?
I guess I can go. I actually wrote it out. So
Okay.
the idea is I would go back in time, and in a Newton tried to read messages out of the Bible. That's a very popular thing. I would seed a message into all the Star Trek series so that Stavros would discover it in late 2016, and it would say,
Such a theme here.
Okay.
My stress, Stavros, you propose to bestow us the pleasure of a shared literary adventures for occasion without expiration. Please don't. Your perpetually perturbed pal, Charlie.
Is Charlie okay? Not in that timeline.
Wow. I feel like all of these are podcast affecting in some way.
These are very personal. Oh my gosh.
All right, good one. Who's next?
I'll go next. It's not nearly as personal as you guys have. I would travel back to 1985, a small town called Hill Valley, California, and I'd walk into a hardware store, and I'd make a key, and on the side of the key, I would write a small note to a young high school kid, and this is what it would say: Marty, beware the tannins. They're the worst. But if you can't, invest in lots of manure and stockpile tons of plutonium. All my best.
I assume you're going into a separate braid where Back to the Future was real.
It's not real? Wait, hold on. What?
Yeah, it's not a documentary. I know, it's crazy.
Don't worry. I almost went back in time and sent the message. Sandemus High rules.
Oh no. Okay. All right. Who's next?
I can go.
Okay, go for it.
So, in honor of our great childhood institution, DARE, what I would do is devote my life to making sure that every cigarette once smoked displayed the date that you would die when you smoke it.
Oh my god!
Wow.
That,
Also dark.
in the service of trying to get people to stop smoking. So,
But they wouldn't tell you that you died of cigarettes. It'd be like, you died, like, tomorrow. And it's like a bus.
Yeah.
It'd be like, oh my god, I should stop smoking.
But what if you did die of cigarettes? What if you died by hit by a bus or something?
That's what I'm
It would
saying.
say nothing,
a date.
right?
Just a date. That's all I gotta do.
But what if it didn't say it didn't die by cigarettes? No, it would be
You know
fine.
what that would do, Adrian? Everyone would smoke at least one cigarette in their lifetime just so they can know when they would die.
I
I
definitely
assume the
would
date
not want to
changes
know the
as
day I
you
would die.
smoke consecutive cigarettes.
No, that implies agency, which in this timeline doesn't exist. So
No, Adrian, that reminds me of my favorite like lifespan time manipulation fact, which is apparently if you go jogging for an hour, you extend your lifespan by average an hour.
Right. It's that old Bloom County cartoon, right? Yeah.
Okay, interesting. So last but not least, I think Vincent. What do you have?
Personally, I would travel back to Edmonton in Canada
Okay.
back in about 1997. Is this ringing any bells for any of you guys? I would get myself a job at a small company named BioWare.
Oh my
And
god.
I would
Save it.
I would create the dialogue for one of the NPCs for Baldur's Gate 1. Specifically Nuber. He was a very famous character who would just bug you the entire time. He'd just follow you over and over and say, hey ya. Literally just follow you across the map and interrupt you in terms of what you're doing. And the Easter egg in that game was that if you played it and you talked to him I think over 1,000 times, enough times, he eventually ran out of dialogue and just starts speaking in plain English to you. And that's the point where I would relate to myself in the future the names of various stocks that were going to be good to invest in and sell before the dot-com bust in 2001 to 2002, so that I myself could get rich enough to realize one of my life dreams, which is to actually, I've told you guys this before, I wanted to buy an entire complex or a city block where we all had houses that we lived next to each other, so we didn't have to necessarily live far apart from each other, and we'd be rich enough that we wouldn't have to work anymore. We could just be friends and play games and do podcasts in the same room without all this latency crap.
Okay.
And we just raise our kids together. That was always my my dream. So that would be what I did. It'd be something altruistic for you guys, not a screw you, Vincent, you're not the podcast, or some other schmucky thing to do.
Hey, Vincent, if you did that, I'd have to figure out when you were about to do that, go back in time and send you a message that says, please don't.
You don't want
Vince wants a cult
it's not
compound, which is understandable.
understandable.
It's okay. If you don't want to live there, it would be an option, Charlie, that you could live there if you wanted to. It could be a vacation house otherwise if you didn't want to. I fully accept the fact that we're not that good.
Wow. Okay. So we have a pretty good selection of stuff. So to review them, my answer was troll Vincent by having a note in the inside of his scarf, valedictorian scarf. Charlie's is a subconscious message via Star Trek somehow to have us not make this podcast. John's is helping fictional characters in Hell Valley. Adrian's is to put your death date on cigarettes, and Vincent's is to acquire wealth for himself by working at video game companies. That's not how it works, really. But yeah, okay. Well,
First person to discover this.
I clearly did not follow any of that.
I gave myself information about the stock market ahead of.
Yes. Cheat the stock
That's how
market.
you do it.
All right, so let's vote. These options are all horrible. I'm gonna go with.
Wow.
I'm gonna go with Charlie, just because
Save you the effort.
Yeah, it just helps me regain all of the regret that I've had.
In life?
You lost the regret and you need it back?
I need to return the regret. Anyway, so Charlie's in the lead, early lead. How about you, Charlie? Where did your vote go?
Despite my harassment, I'm gonna have to go with Vincent. one of us could be rich, why not? Why?
Would all of
not?
us actually? I would have shared the cash with all of you.
Oh
guys.
wow, so generous.
And all the
Okay.
nerds who talked to that guy over 1,000 times and figured out the stock market, which would just readjust itself because that's how the stock market works, and then none of us would have made any money.
All I need is a one-time payout. One-time payout.
Oh, one time. Okay.
No, I wouldn't keep selling. I just one-time payout when the .com bubble burst. Just like short everything and then
Oh.
make a ton of money and then that's it.
All right, John. Where's your vote go?
Oh, I really wanted to vote for Adrian's because it's so creative. I love it. Oh, but you know what? Vince's is too hopeful. I love it. I'll be there on that. I'll be on
So
that block
optimistic.
with you. I'll be on that block with you, Vince.
Yeah. Well, we can still do it, John. I still have faith in the future.
That's good. You and me.
All right, Adrian. Where does your vote go?
I got him up for Charlie for the effort that he put in, for sure.
Wow, tied for the lead.
Perpetually.
And Vince can't vote for himself, so this is...
Yeah. Vincent, where does your vote go?
Oh no, I was fully going to vote for Adrian because that's not professional. I want people who smoke to know that it's not potentially good for you. Though I do feel a little bit bad about the confounding about like, hey, you're just giving you a death date without necessarily saying it's due to smoking. Like that's a little bit misleading, but whatever it takes to get to this.
By implication, it'll do its job.
Wow, I mean, unfortunately, we can't. There's no re-voting here. I can't make Vincent not vote.
Is there a
for
tiebreaker?
himself.
Can we have a
Wait,
tiebreaker?
Vincent
I don't
can
know.
tie break.
Vincent would have to tie break by voting for.
He can't. He can't vote for himself. You're right.
Well, I voted for Adrian
Yeah.
I know.
So
Yeah. So
because that was what I was going to vote for in the first place.
okay. Well, you know what? I guess I'll have to just step in and tie break. Charlie, we'll have to go with your.
He'll just
Give you
double
the
his
win.
vote.
Yeah.
Unfortunately
Charlie.
for all of you listening, you are in a me sending out that message universe. I am
Timeline.
sorry.
A braid. Yeah. Congratulations, Charlie, for whatever that's worth.
That is the cause of 2020, just all of it. I'm sorry.
All of
Everything
it.
2020 really.
us
Makes
is
sense.
so we are the problem.
Hey, you change one thing and then like everything goes. Yeah.
Yeah, that's how that works, right?
I just want to let the
ahead.
public health
Theoretical
officials know that we are not
Fisher tells
responsible
us
for
so.
COVID-19. Just putting it out there.
We're what?
That's 5G cell towers. I thought was responsible. Right?
We are not
Oh
responsible.
yeah,
for
it's
COVID-19.
5G. It's 5G. Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry to confound things.
Yeah, it's not 5G. All right,
Please wear a mask.
please wear a mask. Yeah,
Science themed podcast promoting 5G is the cause of all of it.
we're that kind of podcast now, apparently. All right, so let's move on to our final segment: the best thing, worst thing. Thing you like the best? Thing you dislike the most? I'll go first. The best thing, like I said before, they're with the as kind of predictable as it was. The translation that the seeker who is following each one of them ends up being red, and the way she ends up resurrecting blue, and like the kind of action hero stuff right at the end made this book better for me. At least I feel like it came together more at the end for me. But I mean, on the flip side of that coin, the worst thing, I mean, once you got over the initial shock or the initial concept of the letter writing, it just went on, and just the love story just wasn't enough for me to keep. I was kind of dreading like where the book was going. I was both like a little bit bored and a little dreading it at the same time. I was like, oh, like, are we just going to end with like a Romeo and Juliet, both characters die situation? And just, I mean, even though it's a novella, that part just went on long enough to where it kind of generated this feeling of like, oh God, like where is this going to go? So kind of two sides of the same coin there. I will say that it did pull it together. God, it just needs a little bit of trim in the letter writing back and forth, and then we've got a really solid thing there. I wish it was more like that, but alas. Let's go to Adrian. Best thing, worst thing. What do you have?
Best thing, definitely the writing, right? I'm just going to read two parts of this. One is adventure works in any strand. It calls to those who care more for a living than for their lives. Right? It's a beautiful line. And then the postscript fun that they had. The keyboard's coated with a slow acting poison. You're going to dead in an hour. Just kidding, or am I? I'm just screwing with postscript. Sure, fun.
Yeah.
Like there's such versatility and like a lot of like incredibly good writing here. I think I'm least satisfied with the ending actually. Contrary to you, I think I think the ending kind of makes sense, but it isn't very exciting and doesn't feel very resolute in a funny way. In part because it is so rote and so sort of determined. I don't know. I wish there was a little bit more at the end. That's what I would say.
Okay, yeah, definitely fair. I did, yeah, there is a little bit of resolution that's lacking there at the end. I totally can see that. Okay, let's go to Charlie. What do you think, Charlie?
I hate to steal it. I hate to steal Adrian's first point, but yeah, the writing. And the nice thing is, it's fun. It's light. It's humorous when it needs to be in terms of the letters mocking each other. It's like desperate and full of emotion when things get more serious later on. Like, I like the fact that it could keep me involved with the characters to the point of by the end, it's like, I want them to kind of resolve this well, not to have it end up like 1984 being super sad or whatever like that. But for me, the ultimate weakness of the book is like, I never quite understood the transition from like gaining like close intimacy with sharing details and that sort of thing. Like, I thought that was really working. But it then like jumps pretty hard to desperate romantic love. Not necessarily sexual love, but like desperate, like can't live without you romance. And to me, that one step is the one reason where like I can't decide whether like I'm ultimately satisfied or not, because I enjoyed the experience of reading the book and I can look over that one fact. But in terms of does it work as something beyond just writing? Like, I'm really torn about.
Yeah, and I had a similar reaction, and I was talking to Vincent a little bit about this, but like this kind of desperate love you're talking about that kind of pops out at the end here. I was thinking like, wow, like what if they like start living together and then somebody like leaves the toilet seat up and then it just completely falls apart.
Yeah. But the one thing I have to like, that's both the thing that I like and it upsets me, is because that's like the cheapest way to get into like this desperate, like connected relationship. Like the one thing I was constantly thinking of is like, why couldn't the rivalry have been enough? Like my one example of where that's done really well, even if like culturally it might not translate very well, is like Berserk, the relationship between Guts and Griffith. Like it's just like, am I full of shit? Like it's like it never gets like explicitly romantic like this, but it has all the emotional intensity and that sort of thing. So that and that ends totally differently. In which case you're just like supremely upset. But like, am I just like talking out my ass?
Isn't there an assumption that they're like admiring each other? Like they're admiring each other's work as they go. Like if you're, if you meet somebody, it's not just about your conversations with them. You interact with them in a way, and they're interacting by witnessing each other's spy versus spy stuff. And,
sure,
right.
I mean, there's in between. There's conversation in between, not like physical conversation, but
they do see each other work. It's not just the letters. Is that what you're trying to say?
Yeah.
I understood that. It's just, it seemed like it going for the full blown like I love you just seemed like a bit much. Like it works emotionally, but it didn't work for me like thematically or logically with where the book was going before then.
All I got from the last 5 minutes that Charlie and Stavros hate love, so let's keep going.
Oh boy!
Wow. Okay. Well, let's move on past that, and let's go to Vincent. Best thing and worst thing.
Best thing, of course, the writing is very good, but specifically for me, what impressed me the most was kind of one of the things that I hated the most as well, was the fact that both authors wrote in the same style. But what impressed me so much is that you very rarely get female protagonists in sci-fi books, and one of the authors was male, and he, I felt, nailed the kind of writing style of like the female protagonist, which I feel is usually pretty hard. So I feel like as a writer, that takes mad chops, especially if he was writing so similarly that he was indistinguishable from the female writer who's writing the female protagonist.
Good point.
So I was kind of impressed by that. So I have to give points to that, and I definitely know like at least one cousin of mine or a couple other like people who I know in my life who I think would love this book to death, and so I'll probably recommend it to them. But the cons for me were relatively strong and strong across the board, but I think maybe the one that struck me the most was I felt like this was like a worse version of Romeo and Juliet, Like the love, like you kind of mentioned, to me, like while you can appreciate someone's work, it felt so juvenile in this, like worse than juvenile in this book. Like I guess my feeling is that like to have like a love that develops over like a pen pal relationship is almost worse than online dating nowadays. Like where it's worse than falling in love in like an instant messenger chat room. Where like at least in instant messenger you could talk ad infinitum for like hours all night long and be like get to know each other to certain degrees. But I don't think they ever knew each other's like favorite like colors. Like they talk about food at one point. So it's like at least they know each other's favorite foods or something like that. But like it was really hard. It's like, oh, like talk about hobbies. It's like, oh well, I like this one book, you should read it. Like it felt so shallow in terms of like the level of depth in which they knew each other. Even though it was like like they knew me inside out, they could foil my every turns, but that's related to work. That's not related to like like, are you a coffee person? Are you a morning person? Are you an evening person? Like, there's so many like nuances to love. Like you were kind of alluding to, Stavros, because we talked about this. It was like, it's not necessarily the toilet seat thing, though. I know a family member who got divorced, and part of the things going up for it was like toilet seat kind of issues. Yeah. And
there are many more mild things coming from things I've heard that have caused divorce.
It's like there's some serious things that have like even impacted my relationship. It's like like how do you align on family? Like, do you have kids? Do you not have kids? What do you invest in? Where do you want to live when you grow up? Like, do you want to continue to work after you after you get married? And who's going to stay home and take care of the kids? Or where, what city do you guys prefer? Like, oh, I hate the West Coast. I can't bear to live in the West Coast. Oh, the East Coast is the best. I want to live in Hong Kong. Like, there's so many things that could like derail a romance like this.
They're gonna make their own future.
Yeah, and the fact that like they sacrificed everything without knowing anything about any of this was just struck me as like a very teenage romance, but they also were like devastating civilizations. It's very clear they were not teenage in terms of like their mentality and their maturity and the level of education and training that they had in the past. Blue was married at some point.
So Red destroys stars. At the end.
Blue at least knew what it took to be married because she was married at some point, but they still fell in love through pen palmanship and blah blah blah. It just struck me as just way too like stupid. Like, I'm sorry, but like, but otherwise, I mean. If you ignore the details, like if you ignore the details of the book, like the hard details of sci-fi, how it happens, why it happens, the hard details of romance, how it happens, why it happens, and you just focus on their conversations and a very superficial love, I feel like it's a good.
I definitely felt like this is kind of gunning for a like fairy tale romance kind of feel with like high passion, love. I mean, not love first sight, but you know what I mean. Like just kind of high passion, and some of us may have a reaction like, God, you haven't lived with anyone. You have no idea what this person's like, but it's, I'm just not sure that, I mean, you're right, but yeah, it's crazy. Can't really fit that into the scope of the novel, but I can definitely see your points for sure.
What are you suggesting? Blue is probably like some 40-year-old dude in his mom's basement, like using Instagram
catfish
as his profile.
Blue's catfish. Oh my God. Go ahead, John. Best thing, worst thing.
I think that actually, so I also like the writing. That was my favorite part of the book. I actually liked the love story quite a bit. I think this book was actually kind of weak on the sci-fi tech explanations point, that's one of my favorite things. But I actually liked the love story. I thought it was passionate. I thought it was juvenile and full of spirit, and I actually liked that. Maybe my idea of love encompasses more than just the cerebral, but I like that a lot. Actually, to be honest, one of my favorite parts of the writing, aside from the love, the romance, and the poetic style, was it was funny. Like the book itself was very funny. Like it was almost like writing a joke where you had the PS and the PSS and the PSSSS and the postscripts, and it just kept going on. And a joke is not funny after like the third or fourth time, but then it comes back on like the 19th, 20th time, and it was really funny. I found myself laughing by the end of the letter, right? The thing I didn't like about the book, I really thought they were going to explain why they're like in a more technical way. I thought they were going to actually explain why these two universes were stable and yet they still needed to fight this war, and I never got it, and it made no sense to me at the end.
Yeah, they don't get to it. Yeah.
So that's a review, but nobody needs to hear from me. This might be my last podcast. Get any respect on this podcast?
I mean, none of us have any respect for anything, so.
I respect you, Stavros.
Oh, thanks.
Are
I
you
used to
okay,
respect you,
Stavros?
Stavros.
Well, let's
Everyone
wrap up
hates
our
love on
discussion
this
at this
podcast.
point. Jesus. That's all the time we have, conveniently.
Thank goodness.
All right. Yeah. So if you, the listener, have any feedback or suggestions on books we should read and discuss, you can reach us at subplotofcoursepodcast@gmail.com or on Twitter at subplotpodcast. And for next month, we're going to be reading a book about teenagers killing each other, Battle Royale. Should be really fun, by Koshun Takami.
It's because Stavros hates love.
Yeah, that's exactly why. Okay, on that note, take care, everybody.
Goodbye, everybody.
Hi, everybody.
Sayonara.